Is it okay to publish an image for victims in conflicts and wars? What about deepfake, misinformation, and how newsrooms are dealing with this conflict news? So, good morning, and it is a privilege to welcome you to today's panel on media coverage on crisis. In an era of rapid information flows, covering crises, whether conflicts, natural disasters, and humanitarian emergencies, has been never more complex. Journalists are navigating an increasingly polarized media landscape, ethical dilemmas, and growing influence of AI-driven news. Meanwhile, technology both empowered and challenge crisis reporting, making it easier to verify information, but also amplifying misinformation. To explore these challenges, we are joined by an estimated panel of media experts. Amir Al-Ahl, an experienced journalist and former Middle East correspondent for Die Spiegel; Jamie Angus, former Chief Operating Officer of Al Arabiya Network, former BBC World Service officer; and Frank Kane, editor-at-large in Arabian Gulf Business Insights, and with 40 years' experience in UK and Middle East media. So let's begin with a fundamental question, Amira. You have reported from the heart of crisis, Egypt, for example, in 2011. What are the biggest challenges journalists face when covering crisis on the ground? And how do you balance speed with accuracy in high-pressure situations?
Thank you, Badr. And hello, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be in Saudi Arabia for the first time, although I was a foreign correspondent in the Middle East for 10 years, that's correct. And yes, I was in Egypt between 2006 and 2016, and so I covered the uprising in Egypt, and I also went to Libya for a very short period once the government fell there. And I think the most important thing is that you, first of all, are secure. Like, I think it doesn't help anybody if you are imprisoned or injured or whatever. So I think once you cover a crisis, I think you always have to think about security issues, so how to go out and find your stories, but at the same time be safe. So you have to have a network, you have to be very well prepared. I think this is always like the basis, like where do I go, who will I talk to, or who are my potential partners. Obviously things will change on the ground. You have to be flexible and react to things that you have not anticipated, but I think good preparation and having a safety net is like key to reporting in a crisis. And you have to be flexible. I mean, telling you maybe how it was in Tahrir Square 2011, there was, in the beginning, it was all very it seemed easy in a way in the first days, but then there was shifts, and you have to react to shifts, and you have to be sensible to that. So I think that it helps also when you know the language, when you know the people, when you have people around you that you can trust, and you can feel, okay, there is now a shift in security. It is becoming more insecure on the ground. So there were days where I went to Tahrir Square without a piece of paper, without a pen, without having my accreditation as a journalist, but only going with my Egyptian ID because it felt safer this way. And I was talking to people, collecting my information, and then went home and started writing my story because I knew I was safer this way. So I think you have to you have to be flexible and try to find your way around. And obviously, the second part of your question, talking about like how to be accurate, well, this, of course, is the base of our job. Be accurate. Try to, yes, you have to be fast, but I think accuracy always goes before speed, from my point of view. I mean,
Yeah, and how is the pressure from the editors in the headquarters?
Well, thank God, it has been a long time that I've been in this in this situation. But yes, you have to be fast, obviously, and you have deadlines. I mean, I was writing for newspapers. There is a deadline to when I have to have my piece in. So you have to balance speed with accuracy. And if I cannot verify something, then I cannot write it. Like I will, for me, my first goal is to be accurate and to have a good story, but it has to be based on facts. If I don't have a fact correct, then I will not publish it. And I mean, in the very beginning of the uprising in Egypt, for the first, I cannot remember, maybe 2, 3, 4 days, we didn't have internet, and we didn't have telephone, and we had to bring our story somewhere. I had to bring it to Germany. So there was only one place we could go. I found out that the Marriott Hotel had a fax machine. So we were all queuing to fax our stories to Germany. And so you have to be, have to find ways to bring your story back to the desk in wherever you are in Germany, England, or whatever.
Well, from the field, we go back to the newsroom. So, Jimmy, and you were the former BBC World Service manager, not an officer, so I did it mistakenly, sorry. From editorial leadership perspective, how do news organizations decide what information to prioritize during crisis, and what role does verification play in preventing misinformation?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you very much for having me. Great pleasure to be here. Look, obviously media organisations had and have a position of huge responsibility in these moments of crisis. And I think the good news is that when a crisis breaks, people are still turning to mainstream news organisations in order to get the information they need. I'm doing some work at the moment for FGS Global, the crisis comms team, just looking at how audiences respond to large news events. And I think the good news is that broadly, audiences are still, on the biggest news stories, coming to mainstream news organisations. And that's because of the relationship of trust. They have a sense of trust that the Al Arabias of this world, Der Spiegel for the BBC World Service, that these organisations are filtering, moderating and assessing information and publishing correct information. But I think below the surface there is a really grounds for concern which underpin your question, which is that in the digital world and the social media space, audiences are more and more accessing content that may well, in fact more likely than not, is just wrong. It's certainly misleading. It may well just be flat out wrong. I think it's probably one of the things we're going to talk about this morning. And news organisations are one of the few remaining sets of institutions that have the ability to, as you say, verify and fact check at scale. When I was in the World Service, when I was the World Service Director, I would say that the BBC was one of the very few remaining global organisations that could do that verification and fact-checking at scale. And actually, since I've left the BBC, they've started this BBC Verify brand, which specifically seeks to kind of lift the curtain for the audience and show the audience how a news organisation checks its facts. And I think that's really, really important in a world where people are starting to feel that it doesn't really matter where they get their information from. It doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. It's all about a kind of vibe. And that's a really dangerous and difficult world for news organisations and broadcasters to be operating in. So I think you're right. It's absolutely essential that those of us still working in large news organisations continually prepared to argue for the value of what we're doing in a crisis so that audience can get that trusted information that they might otherwise be accessing it entirely incorrect.
Wonderful. So Frank, if I ask you as someone deeply involved in media, how should journalists be trained to handle these complexities of crisis reporting, and in both ethically and logistically as well?
Well, thanks, Badr. I must say, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here for the second year running. I was here last year, and I wrote a column saying how impressed I was with the event, and I admired Saudi Arabia's swagger and bravado in the media industry. And I think the same is true of this event now, actually. It's really good to see so many young Saudis who want to get involved in media, and especially young women. So I think that's really commendable, and I'm pleased to be here again. But to go to your question about it, yes, of course, crisis puts huge strains on media, on journalists. They say that journalism is the first rough draft of history, but they also say that truth is the first casualty of war. And I guess, war is the ultimate crisis in many ways, although, of course, media has a responsibility to report other kinds of crises, environmental crises, economic and financial crises, and we as journalists have a responsibility to report these accurately and to make sure that nothing that we do, nothing that we report inflames the crisis, because there are very real costs to how journalists operate in crisis. 2024, for example, saw the highest number of media casualties in war in history. So we all have to be very aware of how we approach this. And as Jamie said, verification is really a huge responsibility for all of us. And as Amira said, I think it's probably better to be second and be right than to be first and be wrong. So, that's a very big thing indeed. I know that we will talk later about AI, but we should point out that AI itself, can actually provoke a crisis on its own. We saw 3 weeks ago or so when DeepSeek was launched and took the world of AI by storm. We had the beginnings of a financial crash on Wall Street that was caused by AI. And if you let me, I must just tell you a little story. About 4 or 5 days after that event, the US markets had eventually recovered. But 4 or 5 days later, I got onto DeepSeek and I asked the bot, Mr. DeepSeek, I imagine this kind of Asian-looking man in somewhere on the other side of the world, whether he had caused the financial crisis. And DeepSeek said, my memory cuts off in September 2023, so I couldn't possibly have been responsible for that. But, it was quite an interesting reaction. But it's a reminder that, AI and all sorts of internet, social media interactions can play a role in provoking or exacerbating crises themselves. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk more about what can be done about that.
Yeah, I hope that you ask him also to correct your title, because there is another Frank Kane, and it's always come up in Google.
Yeah,
right?
there is. Yeah, there is. Yeah, but
it's interesting. So I'll come back to Amira and Jamie. Crisis reporting often involve traumatic image and sensitive information sometimes, and I'm sure that thousands of times in newsrooms there is this debate. We were talking, Jimmy and I, in the morning about whether have we just published the picture and the image as it is to show the public what is happening, or sometimes we have this responsibility of the dignity of victims who they might, or their loved ones, they don't like to see them like that.
It's a big question, but I think it's a question that probably Jamie can answer better than me, because I mean I was the one who is in the field. I'm not a photographer, which also I think is also a different thing. Once you're a photographer, you have to really already select while you're taking your images. But so I'm a writer. I would write my stories. I didn't really have to think too much about the images that then the editorial board would choose for the stories. But I think also while reporting, you already have to think always of the dignity of the people that you are reporting about. I have a responsibility for the people that I write about, or that I talk with. I think it starts with security also. Like, I have a responsibility not just to be safe myself, but also to make my sources be, safe and secure. And I should never jeopardize their security for my story. That definitely, my ethos, my journalistic, ethics say this is definitely a line I should not cross. So my safety and their safety and security comes first, and that goes also, hand in hand, I think, with the images that you choose. But I think images are chosen mainly in the desks, back home. So I think Jamie probably can talk more about that.
Try that one.
Yeah.
Try that one. I'm really concerned about this, and I think it's another way that social media has very much changed the standards of broadcast and print media. So before social media, we were the gatekeepers, right? You heard David Abrahams was on this panel yesterday talking about in the non-news space how there used to be a very small number of gatekeepers who took all the decisions about what people did or did not see. And the same is true of the news industry. In the pre-digital era, a small number of people, including the three of us on this panel, and indeed you, Badr, would have taken those decisions about what images were published, particularly disturbing images around death, images of bodies, the most sensitive images in conflicts. And we had the megaphone, right? The media were the megaphone, and we had complete control over what people did and didn't see. And broadly, we exercised those responsibilities in good faith. We tried to take decisions that balanced the need not to sanitize the reality of wars, but also that respected certain editorial standards. That's all been completely blown out of the water. And if you go onto social media now, I am still shocked daily by how much explicit and disturbing imagery is just present on social media sites without any kind of content warning or mediation. And it's absolutely true that that has shifted the conversation, because you now find audiences saying, well, hang on, I don't trust the media anymore because the media are hiding things from me, and they are hiding things that I can see on my phone. And that is a really big challenge for us in this industry, and it shows the way that what is happening in this kind of uncontrolled space is starting to drag standards in mainstream media in a direction that we might not want to go. We feel we should be very, very careful about showing images, for example, of bodies. But at the same time, our audience are saying, why are you hiding this information from us? And it's part of the way in which that relationship of trust between media organizations and their audiences is starting to come under real strain in the digital era.
Yeah, and I think it's not only about images. Maybe Amira would, maybe you would like face this type of stories where you have to talk to victims' families, for example, the loved ones, they just died or something. The way how you talk to them, the way how you ask them to publish the information about their kids, their families. How did you deal with it?
I don't think I ever had to talk to somebody who lost a loved one. I can't remember, but any story where there's sensitive issues, I mean, you have to be sensitive to their feelings. And I think empathy is one of the biggest things you have to bring into this job. I think if you don't have empathy for the people you talk to, for the stories you are dealing with, then I don't know if you're wrong in that job, but you're dealing with people all the time. It's a people's job. You go out there and you meet people all the time. You should have some kind of empathy and be able to to approach people in the right way. And I think, yes, you have to be very sensitive, and you have to always put yourself in their shoes. Try at least. Obviously, I'm coming from a very privileged situation. I know, in most cases I go to people, they have a completely different life than I have. But you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware that I'm the one who has all the privileges, and it is a privilege, and I always feel this way. My job is such a privilege. I have the privilege to go to people's houses, to meet, people from completely different stratas of life, cultures, backgrounds, and I'm allowed to tell their story. They actually give me, one of their most intimate stories, feelings, and they share them with me, and I have the responsibility to handle them with care and respect and with dignity. I think this is really a very big responsibility that we have as journalists, and we should always be aware of that. And I think it starts talking with people with respect and not coming from, I don't know, a very high, point, say, I'm the big, I don't know who. No, you allowed me to come into your life. You allowed me to come into your home. I have to be respectful to this. And I think that's where it starts, and it goes, the next step is where what Jamie was saying, about what pictures, what images can I use, because this is all a form of respect. We are human beings. We are, dealing with each other, and we should do it in a respectful way. So I think this is the basis of our job.
Yeah, if I can add something, I think it's more difficult sometimes even to speak not to the victim. Sometimes if something happened, have to speak to the attacker family, for example. I've experienced this, and it is really, really difficult first to convince them and to go through any information or something like that. But I'll come back to Frank and speaking about social media influencing public perception. How can journalists deal with misinformation while maintaining journalistic independence as well?
Right. Well, the short answer is with difficulty, but with application. I come to this from a background in what's now called mainstream media, traditional media, i.e. print newspapers in the UK from the 1980s onwards. And there was a very rigorous structure for how news was verified before it got into print, before it got published. It went through reporters, sub-editors, news editors, editors-in-chief. It was a very strict process. This was long before the days of citizen journalism, which in many ways is a good thing. It increases the number of sources that you have, the overall potential for news gathering. It gives you direct access to witnesses on the spot. But at the same time, I think it's the next phase in the modern media process where it goes wrong. Because it is not edited or curated after the citizen journalism phase. It's simply splashed on the internet. And as Jamie said, that often means that it can be wrong. So I think we need to reapply some of the old techniques of news verification, which were there in my day, he said, like an old man. But they were, and it worked. And organizations like the BBC, who still have these processes, and other mainstream news organizations, I could reel off a long list of names here, but I think that you can trust them, despite the fact that trust all round in mainstream media has declined. I still think I would trust mainstream media to get things right any time over most of the modern social media websites that seem to produce lots of distortions, fakes, inaccuracies. I think in many ways we need to go back to how it was and reimpose some of those kind of structures.
Yeah, I think we faced this during COVID. During COVID, people, they don't listen to anyone on Twitter or Facebook, right? They just go to the mainstream media to get the instructions, to double check the information, and to read about the vaccine, even if they are not convinced to do it. So I would like to go to another section of our conversation, and it is technology. And when we say technology, I think we overuse the AI, but we have another stuff to talk about in technology, right? So for Jamie and Frank, I think technology is changing how crises are covered, right? From AI-generated news to deepfake risk, and how media organizations ensure responsible AI use, for example, while maintaining journalistic integrity.
Yeah, this is a huge question and a huge area. I mean, just a couple of thoughts. You know, the ability of, we're talking about pictures and visual journalism a bit this morning, and I think the ability of AI to generate highly realistic images in real time that are almost indistinguishable from real images themselves is a huge challenge to the industry about how do you sensibly regulate and label AI-generated images, and actually also use them creatively. So, for example, you know, Frank used to run the business section of a national newspaper in the UK, and you know, we sometimes use stock photography. You know, you have a sort of stock picture of someone holding their mobile phone, looking stressed, you know, to illustrate a story. Now, if you use an AI-generated image instead of a stock photo, is that any worse ethically? I'm not sure that it is, but I think that there needs to be labeling, there needs to be a kind of understanding amongst the audience in terms of media literacy, that not every image you see may actually be real. It might be a representation generated by AI, and how you label that. And of course, that can help audiences understand complex stories where there aren't visual images easily available. I mean, that's how stock photography began back in the pre-digital era. So that's just one stupid example. But even as a media literate, supposedly an industry insider and a media literate person, I still find myself being fooled. Can I admit on the panel that I sometimes get fooled? You know, when you're half asleep and you see, I saw the picture of you might remember this, the Pope wearing a Balenciaga jacket, right? Yeah. And I think I was half asleep, but I kind of thought, wow, that's really surprised me. And so you know, even those of us who work in the industry are really, really struggling with this, and we need to have codes and language to describe it and to share that with the audience, I think, Frank.
Yeah, I would go along with that 100%, Jamie. And look, there is no putting this genie back in the bottle, is there? You know, AI is here, it's here to stay, and we have to make the most of it. I mean, don't forget that AI can make mistakes, you know, so you have to fact check AI too. I was working on a story recently about the UAE's trade relations with the United Kingdom, and I asked ChatGPT to give me a little briefing on where we stood on this, and it came back and confidently told me that the UAE had signed a free trade agreement with the UK in 2022. And I thought, hold on, I don't remember that happening. So I went back to ChatGPT and said, look, awfully sorry, but I think you're wrong here. And ChatGPT was almost human in its kind of remorse. You know, oh, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, please forgive me. No, you are 100% right, yeah, you know, so it can be authentically humble as well when it wants to be. But the point is that we can use AI to fact check as well. You know, there are some very good models for fact checking out there that are run by AI systems, and we have to use them. You know, and Jamie's point about accuracy, you know, and getting it right, you know, those really have to be at the forefront all the time, I think. And don't be confused by AI. You know, it throws so much information your way. You know, you have to learn to discriminate between the facts that it's throwing at you. I think that's really crucial.
Yeah. But if we just connect the technology to our main subject, which is conflicts and wars, I think from my experience, technology is used in conflicts in two stuff. First, misinformation. Second, to communicate. Like back to the days, people, they were not used to get information from social media, but in 2011 and other events, I think it have been used a lot. So I think it is important to, I don't know how to identify it, but I think AI will play a big role in current conflicts. If we see like Ukraine war, in Sudan right now, I saw something deep fake in Yemen, for example. So I don't know Amira as a reporter in the field, and I know you are not a big fan of talking about AI because you have reported about reality, right? So how do you see that?
I mean, I cannot really talk too much about AI, but I mean, technology has always two sides, as everything has two sides. So if we talk about social media, and we just talked about this, Jamie talked about it, all the difficulties with it, and for us as broadcasters or journalists. But of course, it has also positive sides. I mean, talking about the uprising 2011, obviously, back then, Facebook and Twitter in Egypt, for example, were the tools that people used in order to organize themselves and to find an outlet, find a way to the streets. So there is always two sides to it, and we have to, find a way. Me as a journalist, obviously, I used Twitter at the time as a tool of information in order to find the people on the ground and to, get information from revolutionaries, etc., people who were, doing.
Yeah. And it was started, by the way, in 2009 in Iran.
Exactly.
And people,
exactly.
yeah, they learned from it, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was, and this was also a wave. Like it really was a wave that spread from country to country, and it was a tool that was used. But at the same time, obviously, I cannot rely on information that comes from social media, especially nowadays. Things have changed dramatically in the last, 15 years. I mean, talking 2011, Twitter was a very different platform than it is today, as we know, and that brings me to a point that I find very worrying, which is what I call a crisis of wealth extremism, where we have people like Elon Musk who buys Twitter and it calls it X, and he can decide what people in the world will see with his algorithms. And I think this is a huge problem, and it's a threat to democracy and the way we see things on the internet. And I think it is something that we as journalists have to be very aware of and tackle, because our job as media is to try to dissect the complex realities on the ground, and I don't think that social media really does that or can do this. This is our job. We have to try to lay out the complexities of reality.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's huge numbers of people who believes this is a support for free speech, and the whole changes happen. So I think it's debatable, and Frank has something to say.
Of course, it's debatable. Sorry, Frank.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, just to say, why isn't this on? I'm really surprised if serious journalists anymore take Twitter as a news source, as a source of factual information. I mean, it certainly is a source of views. If you want to know what Elon Musk thinks, okay, go straight to Twitter. I haven't used it since he took it over 18 months ago. I cancelled my account, and I just think it's completely muddying the waters and throwing out disinformation all the time. I don't really think we can take it seriously as a news function anymore.
I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? That we, even if us as individuals, Frank, we avoid Twitter or don't use it as a source, I think for good reasons. But the fact is that traditionally, I was talking about gatekeepers, traditionally the media would decide what is a story and what is not a story. And Amir is absolutely right that one of the most important things about Twitter now is that the person who owns it gets to decide what is a story in Germany. I mean, if you look at Elon Musk's activism about the AfD in Germany, or about the riots in the United Kingdom, this is somebody who has the most powerful megaphone in the world and happens to be the world's richest man. He is the person who effectively sets running orders for mainstream news organizations in countries like Germany or the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. And I think that is not going to change. That change is now here to stay, and it is very difficult for traditional media organizations to respond quickly enough to the nature of that change.
So we moved from the conflict to the technology conflicts now. But yeah, yeah, you can speak loudly.
I don't have now.
Yeah.
Haha. No, but I think it is also a crisis of journalism. This is not just a crisis of technology; it's a crisis of journalism because the richest man in the world, as you know, Jamie just said, decides what we see, what we read, and what we discuss. And he is going into political debates and championing the far right in Germany, for example, and giving people giving his opinion about what people should vote for. So I think this is really a challenge to traditional journalism, and it's something that we have to take very serious.
Yeah, nice. So the million-dollar question now. What is the biggest challenge or opportunity in crisis reporting over the next 5 years? And I might start with Frank.
Well, I think we've touched on the biggest one, haven't we, already? I think it's verification. I think it's making absolutely sure that the facts that the journalist is putting out there are correct at the time of dissemination. And also, as we've already discussed, that's becoming more difficult by the day. So I think we have to reinstill some of those, more traditional news values. Hearing Amira here speaking about, the power of one individual to shape news. Well, of course, the other side will come back and say, but look, it's always been like that. We've always had, media moguls. We've had the Hearst, we've had the Murdochs. They shape news. But they shape it via a far more traditional, authentic structure. There is a news gathering, news verification structure there at all of Mr. Murdoch's newspapers. I worked for him in the 90s at the Sunday Times, and I can seriously tell you that was a thoroughly professional news organization. He might have his own agenda, and that might be quietly transmitted to you, but the process of news gathering, was 100% professional. So to answer your question about it, the challenge is to, not throw the baby out with the bathwater in the new media era. To keep some of those old checks and balances that helped us verify news before it was published. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, and what about you, Jimmy?
I think two things. Firstly, it's becoming more expensive and more dangerous to go to these contested spaces where there are conflicts. The unacceptable loss of life of journalists, including in Gaza in the last year, Frank mentioned rightly already. It is really limiting journalists' ability to actually go and gather the news at first hand, a model on which the whole principles of established journalism is based. So there is an increasing number of ungoverned spaces that are too dangerous, bluntly, for mainstream journalism organizations to send their staff under any circumstances. Actually, you reported in Yemen. You ran a bureau in Yemen. I think, that is one. Sometimes Ukraine, the Gaza and Lebanon wars have also been the same. That is a challenge for our industry, and we've already talked about if mainstream news organizations aren't there, what else kind of flows in to fill the void. And then the second point, as I say, as we've already touched upon, is this breakdown of trust where audiences, when there's a crisis, their first instinct may be to be suspicious about what they're being told, rather than to be welcoming of what they're being told by trusted news brands. And Amira touched rightly on some of the reasons for that. And it remains a concern for me, because these crises, you talked about crisis reporting, these moments of crisis are when countries and communities need to come together around an agreed set of facts. And it's particularly important in that crisis moment. And that is the part of our industry, the agreed set of facts, the common square, the megaphone. These are the things that are breaking down the quickest, and I think we're struggling to respond quickly enough.
Brilliant. And Amira, in a minute. Again?
So again, no. Because we're running out of time, I think I can just agree to what Frank and Jamie said, and I think really one of the basic and the most important challenges is this relationship of trust that Jamie just touched upon. I think this is something that we really have to re-establish, because I think lots of it has been lost, and I think this is what we have to build on, because media is needed in order to break down the realities and really show the complexities of stories and realities. It's not as simple as it is put in a social media. It's not always one side. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think conflicts will not stop, and we have to stop here. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Saudi Media Forum, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks. Thank you very much.